Live now.
Welcome back to Rectory Ramblings. I'm Father Scalia.
And I'm Father Agent.
And that was kind of a different version of Rambling Fever by Merle Haggard. It was a little more modern,
different,
a little more, not as sort of country-ish as I would have liked. Anyway, so this evening we want to talk about creation. So we've had some questions about that. What's interesting is that we all want to know where we came from, right? So there's a lot of interest now in, genealogy and your family tree and everything. You get your DNA test to say, sort of where you came from, parts of the world and everything. And I think that speaks of just a deeper desire to know, okay, what are our ultimate beginnings? Mm-hmm. And I think it's worth pointing out as before we get into it, that some of the greatest philosophical mistakes that make their way into public life are based on a mistaken notion of creation and where we come from. So the Catechism has this great line. It seems just so dull and perhaps even banal. Catechesis on creation is of major importance. Sure is. Right. It goes on. It concerns the very foundations of human and Christian life, for it makes explicit the response of the Christian faith to the basic question that men of all times have asked themselves: where do we come from? Where are we going? What is our origin? What is our end? Where does everything that exists come from, and where is it going?
And you brought up that point that we all want to know where we came from. Yeah. But this adds, we want to know our end. We want to know the purpose of life. And in a sense, we can't really understand that if we don't understand where we came from. And
because of where we came from, we'll kind of it tells us who we are, but also why we are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And not just in a physical sense. So science can tell us what we are and how we came to be in a physical manner to a degree. Mm-hmm. But it can't tell us why we exist. So, all right, so let's get into this. First of all, what do we mean when we use the word creation or the word creator for God?
It's kind of related to what we talked about last time. God is almighty or all-powerful. Mm-hmm. Well, creation is an act of that kind of power. And power in the ultimate sense is giving being to what doesn't have being. So God creates out of nothing. He doesn't take already existing materials and just make things out of them.
Right.
He creates being where there was no being before.
And that's what we mean by creator.
Yeah.
And creation. It's what tradition is called ex nihilo, from nothingness. Yeah. He creates something from nothing, which is, I've never been able to do that. So, that's always, you have?
It's a power only God has.
Right. So that's it. But not just that. I think what the book of Genesis, tells us is not only that he brings these things out of nothing, but also, and we hear this again and again and again in Genesis 1, God saw that it was good. Yeah. And so there's a goodness to his creation as well, which is a reflect. We kind of touched on that last week about his almighty power is not unreasonable. Mm-hmm. It's not just sort of sheer tyranny. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he's bringing something out of nothing. That already is. So how do we respond to things like, that the Big Bang, things like that? People say, well, no, it wasn't God. It was just kind of this scientific thing.
Well, I think it's always worth pointing out when discussing that what was the scientific consensus before the Big Bang Theory? Like, what were people thinking? And actually, at the time the Big Bang was proposed as a theory, most secular scientists didn't like it because they thought it implied too much a creator. It implied too much. So, I mean, Aristotle he thought that the universe was eternal. It had no beginning. Okay, and the scientists at the time of the Big Bang being proposed may not have thought exactly the same as Aristotle, no, but they had a conception of a universe that just always was.
Right.
You know, it had no beginning in that sense. There was always just stuff floating around or whatever. I don't know, but the Big Bang makes it seem too much like there's a beginning and therefore there's a creator. So the Big Bang was proposed by a Catholic priest who was also a scientist, and so actually the Big Bang Theory like lines up very closely with our idea of creation. But you're saying now people might look at that and say, "Oh, well, this just explains it all.
It
we
just
don't
happened.
have a need
Right,
for
right.
a creator." But that's.
I didn't know that it was proposed by Catholic priests. That's very
Really?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I took an astronomy class in college, and the only thing I remember from it is on the last day, the professor he walked through Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
and he talked about just the origins of it, and of course, you know, what's the first thing that God speaks? Let there be light. That might as well be a bang, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the last class, he just said how everything that he'd been talking about all semester was completely compatible.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. So if there's a bang, there must have been somebody to cause it. This is just a matter of you can't have an effect without a cause.
Yeah. Now I want to say there's a huge philosophical mistake that a lot of people make around creation, and it could have to do with the Big Bang as well. People get science and philosophy confused a lot of times, or they think that if we can explain the scientific causes of everything, we've explained everything. But no, there's a deeper philosophical point. So it would be, even if you're saying God caused the Big Bang, and that's the beginning of the universe, you're thinking of it wrong if you're thinking, well, God is just this little guy who does something and that causes the Big Bang. No, God doesn't cause in the same way creatures cause. God's the creator, he's not a creature. So if you're thinking of God and the way he exerts causality upon creation, as if he's just like another creature, just bigger and stronger, you're thinking about it wrong.
And I think that we always tend to sort of, I mean, because we're always trying to understand him according to analogy, right? And so we lapse into thinking that creation is just like a bigger version of making, and you can make you can make an omelet, you can make a chair, we make all sorts of things, some pretty extraordinary things, but none of them is creation.
Right.
So I think that's kind of what you're getting. It's they make a mistake of thinking the analogy is
So let's say
that we make things and God creating things is kind of like that.
Right. And also, even if we can explain in great detail from a scientific point of view, it doesn't explain it all. There's a different question and a deeper kind of question that needs to be answered. So, like, let's say we actually could understand the Big Bang Theory more, and this could happen, where we could understand how, the forces of gravity being what they are, or the laws of the universe being what they are, could somehow like open something up out of another universe or something. I don't know. Like, however it might be explained, it still doesn't explain the fact that there is something rather than nothing.
And so science can tell us physical causality, but they can't tell us why there is anything physical to begin with.
Exactly, or why there are laws of physics, or why there's not just matter, but anything. Why there is something rather than nothing.
And that's the fundamental, that's one of the fundamental philosophical questions, right? Why do things exist rather than not exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? And so this point that you made earlier about Aristotle thinking that the world, that creation is eternal. This is a great example of revelation having a profound impact on philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
because philosophically that was just kind of presumed everything always existed, and it's really Christianity's contribution to philosophy to say, well, actually, no, that there was a start to this,
Mm-hmm.
and if we can understand the beginning of it and our origins, then we can understand ourselves better. And I think, which just goes back to why we all want to know where we came from.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can understand myself better if I know where I came from.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing that I think is worth worth talking about in the first chapter of Genesis, the first two chapters, really, but the first most especially, it's a narrative about God doing things deliberately.
Mm-hmm.
Let there be light. And then, especially when he creates us, he sort of, he creates the animals on the sixth day, and then he kind of steps back and he talks to himself. And you can do that when you're three persons, but not otherwise. And he says, let us create man in our image. And so it is a deliberate act of a good God. Now, one of the big, I think, shibboleths is that Genesis is just another creation story, and there are tons of creation stories in the ancient world, and this is just another one of them. Except that this is drastically different than most of them.
It isn't even proper to call the other ones creation stories.
Yeah, right. They're sort of making stories, aren't they?
Yeah.
So Cardinal Ratzinger writes about one particular story or myth, which is that creation, or the world, came about through a cosmic battle between a dragon and a god, and the dragon is slain,
Mm-hmm.
and his body becomes the earth, and his blood becomes us,
Mm-hmm.
kind of coagulates and becomes us.
Yeah.
Now, this is a great example of how a bad understanding of the beginning will lead to a bad understanding of society.
Mm-hmm.
So if your view of the earth is that this is a dead dragon's body, and if your view of your neighbor is that this is the dead dragon's blood, you're not going to have a happy view of creation.
Mm-hmm.
or of
humanity. And what it also means is things just kind of came about the way they are in a happenstance way. There's no...
Or by violence.
Yeah, out of chaos.
Yeah.
And, we think, we hear these ancient myths and we think, wow, they're so primitive. But, I mean, let's be charitable that they're just trying to make sense of reality.
Absolutely.
And we see the world as a chaotic and violent place. So, okay, this myth kind of makes sense in trying to account for that. That's what they're trying to do. We know from Revelation that, no, it was created with goodness and order. It's because of sin that we experience the
Right.
chaos and violence that we do.
I remember years ago, almost 20 years ago now, I was on a fishing trip up in northern Minnesota, actually, the boundary waters of Canada. And the last night we were there, we saw the Northern Lights. And it was just extraordinary. I'd never seen them before. And I remember just thinking, if you're, before Revelation, before the advent of science, which, kind of explains the Northern Lights, you're looking at that and you're thinking, this is, kind of a scary place. What are those things going on, there on the horizon? And you're going to try to make sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's fair. We don't want to be too hard on the primitive cultures, because actually it's a tribute to their humanity that they were trying to make sense of things.
Yeah.
And
but back to your point that the way you understand things affects, it has consequences. So yeah, if you think of the earth as a dead dragon's body and humanity is made from his coagulated blood, then that affects the way we treat each other, because we don't necessarily see an inherent dignity. We just kind of rose out of this battle.
Right, exactly.
And it's not, we're not a product of loving care or intention or anything.
Right. Yeah. There is not the will to create us, or the goodness, of that will. Yeah, and I think other some of the modern philosophers, when they talk about our creation, how God created us, and they'll say, depending on the philosopher, it's either that we were created really as just in in combat, right? In competition with one another. See it in Screwtape Letters. Uncle Screwtape says at one point, "To be means to be in competition," and that's a kind of a good summary of some the point of view of some modern philosophers is that it's kind of a Darwinian view of creation. It's just survival of the fittest.
And who are you thinking of, like Hobbes or those kind of?
And then again, if that's your view of creation and how we came to be and what we are at the source, well, you're not going to have a happy view of society.
Yeah.
And according to that view, society is you get the Leviathan, right?
Yeah.
Who just the state just to dominate everyone.
Yeah.
Be the strongest one on the block. And right, society only comes by way of might.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's another, which is that we're all just created peaceful and loving, and each one of us is just on our own, and we have this complete freedom. And entering into society, entering into relationships requires a compromise of that. And so now the point is that society is a concession. I have to, I'm less of myself when I enter into society. But what's clear from the very beginning in Genesis is that no, human society is a positive good willed by God for our good. So he doesn't just create man and woman, but he also says be fruitful and multiply.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for their good.
Yeah, so man is naturally part of human society. It's not that society is this foreign thing imposed on man.
Right, compromising my freedom, compromising my fulfillment.
So that view would get that wrong. It also gets wrong the reality of original sin. Like we on our own and are not just totally free and pure. No, we're infected by sin.
Yeah, there's a wound there.
Yeah.
But maybe we don't want to get to sin yet because we still have a lot of good things to say about creation, don't we?
We have a lot of very good things to say.
Well, this is something actually that Pope Benedict spoke about in one of his last addresses. That more and more with transhumanism and things like that, we don't see ourselves as created beings.
Yeah. So what's transhumanism? That's like we're looking at through machinery and technology we can go advance beyond the limitations of human nature.
Right.
So
it's going to hinge on there not being any such thing as human nature. It's Dewey, the American philosopher, who says it is man's nature not to have a nature, which is just philosophical nonsense, but dangerous nonsense. That we don't have a nature, so we get to decide, and we see a lot of this in the transgender ideology. Is that I get to decide now what I am, and you have to acknowledge that. That first line or the first part of the line in Genesis 1, God created them. Male and female, he created them. Yeah. But just sort of the first that we are created. We don't get to create ourselves.
Yeah. So our nature is given to us. It's not invented by us. It's for us to discover it, not to invent it. Our identity is given to us. It's not invented by us. Yeah, these are huge points.
Huge points. And what you just said there, I think could be pretty controversial, I think, in our culture to a lot of people that, we're given our identity. And especially in the United States. No, I want to stake on my own identity. I want to, I'm going to decide for myself.
I mean, even without belief in God, you're born into a family. You're born
you're born as a particular kind of creature.
Yeah.
You're not this creature.
All of reality is given to us. We don't. Right. It's not like we're in a matrix where we from square one get to decide what everything is. No, all of reality is given to us, including what we are and who we are.
Right, and part of that reality. So we are created, and we're created male and female. Mm-hmm. And so this part of creation, and here, this is where we get to another ancient myth. I think Aristotle speaks of this. Maybe it's Plato. That originally we're created asexual, and then as a punishment, boom, we are made male and female, and so you're always looking for your other half,
Right.
which kind of has this romantic tone of "you complete me" sort of stuff, right? Um, but ultimately, it's a really pessimistic view. Again, if that's where you think we came from, are you going to have a happy view of the difference between the sexes? No, because at the source, it's a punishment.
Mhm.
Now, given the misunderstandings between men and women, you can sometimes see
Well,
why people would think it's a punishment.
I mean, with that account, they're trying to account for what they experience.
Exactly,
Right?
their
So, okay,
experience.
there are these differences and hardships and conflicts between
Right.
men and women. Like, okay, he's trying to understand that. But
Yeah,
just
exactly.
giving a bad explanation.
Exactly. Trying to apply some reason, put some reason on the chaos. And I think that gets to a key distinction between the ancient world, I think, and also now today. So we talked about some of those ancient myths are trying to impose reason on what on a perceived chaos, right? They're trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
That's not what we do. Because of Revelation, we believe that creation is reasonable at its core, and because of that, we try to discern what is there. We're not trying to impose reason on it. We're trying to discern what is reasonable and true, and that's called science, right?
Yeah. That's a huge point. It gets back to what we talked about last time. God's power is always perfectly linked with his wisdom and his goodness. And so what he creates isn't just a bunch of unintelligible nonsense. Right. There's something with an intrinsic order or reason in it. That's what makes science possible. That's why we can look at things and study them, right, discern patterns, figure out laws. It's because there's reason inherent in creation.
Right, and a number of authors have pointed out this, like, so the scientific revolution. Mm-hmm. They say, well, really, it was natural for it to happen in Christendom, mm-hmm. In Europe, that had its root deep in this conviction that creation is intelligible because it was brought into being by a reasonable and good creator. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we can be confident in our scientific pursuits.
Yeah. So if people tell you, oh, science and
religion
belief in God are totally contradictory,
completely incompatible.
No, actually, the fact that God is creator is what makes science possible.
Right.
To begin with, yeah.
Right. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, when they get into that line of thought, they fail to appreciate that scientists, I think, still now are basing their work on a presumption that comes from Christianity. It comes from Judeo-Christianity, really. And without that, they couldn't do their work.
Yeah.
So, okay, so God creates all things, and then he keeps creating things.
Like he creates your soul, my soul, everybody's soul. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, yeah. Is there anything else that he continues to create?
This is great. I think I see what you're getting at. Yes.
Yes. Good. Can you explain that more?
Yeah. Here's another big misconception people have about creation. This would be like the deist misconception that God, as creator, he just designed the blueprint. He built the clock. He sets the clock in motion. Then he just steps back, and the clock just keeps going on its own with its own laws that govern it completely. That's a misconception because we are created out of nothing. I mean, all of creation is created out of nothing. And so if God ceased to hold it into existence, even for a moment, we would just collapse into nothingness again. God's act of creation isn't a one-time thing where he just sets the clock in motion and steps back. His act of creation is one continuous act.
Because he's outside of time and he's present to all times.
Yeah.
And so this gets back to what you were saying earlier about how we think God creates things the way we make things. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But this fundamental difference.
Yeah, so God creates and he is constantly holding creation in being. So that act of creation is one continuous act.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's creating right now.
Mhm.
Right now, he's creating you and me.
Yeah.
In effect, in the sense that not that we didn't come into being,
Yeah.
however many years ago, but in the sense that he's holding us in being, and that is an act of creation. That's a continuing.
It's the same, the
Yeah.
one same very act of creation.
Yeah, and it emphasizes what you said earlier, that he does. This is what science and physics can't get to, is this philosophical truth that he is outside of his creation.
Yeah.
And that's where the deist analogy, the famous, clockmaker or whatever. I heard it was a watchmaker.
Watchmaker, whatever.
But I mean,
Clocks and watches do the same thing. They just tell time.
well, not anymore. I mean, they can do a lot more. Play the radio for you if you want. So, anyway.
Not my watch.
Right. No, we don't have any iWatches here. So, but that analogy again, it thinks of God in terms of part of his creation and fails to appreciate the creator as distinct from and transcendent to his creation.
Yeah.
There's a lot here.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. Well, then maybe next week we can talk about where it all went bad.
Okay.
But maybe, before we get there, we should maybe flesh out a little bit more about, because in Genesis 2, so Genesis 1 tells us God created man, male and female, he created them. Right? Be fruitful and multiply. Good stuff. But then in the second chapter of Genesis, he creates, there's another telling of it. It's sort of like a detail of the creation of Adam and Eve. So first he creates Adam out of slime of the earth and then breathes life into his soul. So let's talk about that. What's that all about?
Yeah, one thing I can point to is the fact that, yes, we are made of matter, we're bodily creatures, but there's an element to the human being that's different than all the other material creatures. We have this spiritual element, we have a soul. In Genesis 2, it speaks of it as this breath of God. God breathes life into it.
And it became a living being.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, and so there's the body and soul, and again a deliberate act of a free God doing that, and then the creation of Eve. I love this line in Genesis 2, because in Genesis 1 we hear repeatedly God looked at it and it was good, it was good, it was good, and then after he creates Adam and Eve, he said it's very good. And then in Genesis 2, he creates Adam, he puts Adam in the garden, says, till the garden and keep it. So Adam's doing yard work. What guy doesn't like to do yard work? And then God says, it is not good that the man should be alone, which I always kind of think is funny, because Adam's like, hey, yard work, I'm fine. But it is not, and it's not like God said, oh my gosh, I forgot. Of course, that line is there for us, right? Yeah. It is not good. Again, the point we were talking about before, we are created for community. We are created for, society is not an imposition. It doesn't take away anything from us. It's not good for us to be alone. Right. So he creates Eve. And here's another funny scene. He puts Adam to sleep, takes out a rib. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Before that, he brings all of the animals in front of Adam, right? And Adam, names all of the animals, which is a divine prerogative, by the way. And then it says, but none of them proved to be a suitable partner for Adam. And so is this God getting it wrong? He's saying, okay, giraffe.
You didn't like the giraffe? Well, what about
rhinoceros? So it's like, what do you want? Come on. No, obviously it's showing the distinction. We are created on the sixth day with the animals. It's showing the distinction between man and the animals, that man has a certain stewardship over the animals. He names them. Then Adam is put to sleep, and Eve's created from his side. So what should we draw away from that? That his rib, God takes out his rib and forms it into woman.
Well, the rib, this is one direction we could go, is the rib's close to the heart. I mean, this is, he's not like taking Adam's toenail or Adam's foot, like...
left earlobe.
Right. This is showing that man and woman are helpmates. They're equal in dignity, although there are differences.
Right.
But they're equal in dignity.
One telling I've heard of it is that Eve is created from his side because she's his equal.
Yeah.
Not from his feet because she's not his inferior. Not from his head because she's not his superior.
Right.
But from his side because she is his equal. To
Right.
be side by side with him.
Is it too much to get into typology, like what St. John Chrysostom says?
Well, I think we should hold off on that.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay. Last thing. Okay, because it all goes south pretty quickly.
Yeah.
They are naked and unashamed. What's the significance? The last line of Genesis 2. And so Adam and Eve are created for one another. They are naked. They are unashamed.
Yeah. Well, we could ask what would make them shame? What would make them feel shame? Well, this is before sin enters the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing. There's nothing to be ashamed about. There's no tendency yet, which we call concupiscence of
Right.
like viewing the other person with lust or viewing the other person as an object to be used, manipulated for one's own pleasure.
Right. Or being ashamed of your own body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
They are literally comfortable in their own skin.
Mm-hmm.
And so, which kind of, I think that one always kind of, I think points back to the creation of Adam from the slime, the soul is breathed into. In other words, their bodies, they are a part of who they are. And again, I think this is an important thing for our day and age because people, body image problems and people, wanting to undergo sex change surgeries and things like that because they don't think that their body is part of who they are. Mm-hmm. And those passages in Genesis are a divine reminder. I mean, science points us to this, but a divine reminder that no, your body is essential to who you are. It's not something you own,
right?
But essential to who you are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Right. So maybe next time we should talk about the fall.
Okay. Where it all goes wrong.
Where it all goes pear-shaped, as they say in England.
I've never heard that.
It's great to go pear-shaped. Yeah.
Okay.
When you get to the middle age, you understand what it means to go pear-shaped. Okay, but we do have a question here from a longtime viewer, Lucy O'Donnell, who asks, does Mary sleep in heaven?
Huh. Well, I think they have enough coffee to... There's,
and they have good coffee. I mean, like the finest espresso, right? Sazzadoro.
Right. Would this be the same sort of thing as eating? Like, well, glorified bodies don't need to.
Right. Does it need rest?
But they can if they want? I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it is unnecessary and unwanted for this reason. Because heaven is perfect rest in God.
Yes.
It's to rest perfectly in God.
Yes.
So I mean, we all like
all the good of sleep is there while you're awake.
Yeah, exactly.
I got it.
It'd be awesome. It's kind of like when you wake up early and you look at your alarm clock, you're like, wow, I've got like another 2 hours that I could sleep. And you're like, this is great. And in heaven, you're like, wow, I don't even have to go to sleep to enjoy the benefit of sleep. Right. I can enjoy the benefit of sleep in full consciousness.
Okay.
Okay, Lucy, I'm not sure you'll appreciate that now, but when you get older, you definitely will. So anyway, thank you for joining us this evening. We'll be back Monday.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Submit your questions if you want to askrambling@gmail.com. God bless.